No one likes car crashes. American cars from the 50s and the 60s looked like they could handle a hit, but they were death traps. Even minor bumps caused a headache. Who's gonna pay for the repair costs? Yes, those beautiful bumpers you saw on these cars, they were just decorations. As the real crash protection, well, that was your own body, and this had to change. Welcome everyone to episode 70 of the Automotive History series. We're going to take a look at the impact of the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers that grazed many American cars during the 70s and the 80s. Some of my viewers that have been keeping up long enough with my crap will remember that I made a detailed multi-part episode about the Malaise era, a time when the American car industry had a tough time keeping up with the fast-changing world. American cars, although big and beautiful, were getting attacked from three sides: vehicle emissions, fuel efficiency, and car safety. Throughout the late 60s and 70s, the US government would come up with new rules and regulations to force car makers to develop new technology to make their cars pollute less, guzzle less gas, and better protect everyone inside and outside the vehicle. And so we focus on one of the most notable products during those years, the alleged improved safety by introducing and installing the so-called 5-mile-per-hour bumpers. You should know that before the introduction of the 5-mile-per-hour battering ramps, bumpers on many cars were more of a decorative piece than anything substantial. It was often believed that the strength of a car came from its structural rigidity and not a set of bumpers. Bumpers came in the wildest shapes and sizes, like standard chrome bars below the grille and headlights, or so-called bumper loops that looped around the inserted grille and headlights. And then there were cars with European bumpers that were rather slim chrome bars. And then there were cars with almost no bumpers, and you know what? No bumpers at all. Although it should be noted that the so-called Endura bumpers in the late 60s Pontiacs were actually quite unique. But all these beautiful bumper designs would abruptly come to an end when in 1971 it was mandated that these new 5-mile-per-hour bumpers would be installed on the all-new 1973 model year cars, which usually went on sale in the fall of the previous year, so in this case 1972. These new bumpers were required to absorb an impact at a speed of 5 miles an hour in the front and 2.5 miles an hour at the rear. Adjusted to inflation, that's about 8 kilometers and 4 kilometers an hour respectively. This law would be updated for the next year, so all the new 1974 models would have 5-mile-per-hour bumpers in the front and rear, with the additional condition that the front bumpers would be able to absorb an impact from any angle and protect all the elements on the car, like the grille and the headlights. This would prove to be an immediate challenge for the American car makers. This meant that those beautiful front-end designs with the most creative bumper styles were immediately thrown out of the window. It was back to putting headlights and grills as complete standalone units on the top half of the front end, and bumpers as separate units on the lower half of the front end. The same goes for the rear end styling. Gone were the well-integrated and cool taillight designs of the bumper. Now it were separate taillights units on top with separate bumpers below. Most American car makers had found a solution to integrate the new bumper standards in their designs. In order to make the bumpers absorb the impact, what car makers did is, well, they essentially took the shock absorbers they fit on the car suspensions, flip it horizontally, and attached it to the bumper on one side and then to the car's frame on the other. The rest of the car body would be designed around or over these bumpers so that in case of an impact, the bumper absorbs the crash by traveling into the body. And allow me to replay that for those of you with hearing problems out there. See? There were also some other solutions, but I'll talk about that when we get there. Interesting to note is that these new rules only specified the performance of these new impact-absorbing bumpers. The law did not tell you how you should design these bumpers. So every American car maker had their own unique approach on the bumper design. So let's go for a spin around Detroit and look at every American car maker's take on these new bumpers. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. edsautoreviews proudly presents Eds Automotive Art Emporium, the official merch store. That's right, over at Eds Emporium, you can find the finest in automotive art made by yours truly. Whether it's a plate you want to hang on your wall in your home or garage, or magnets and stickers that you want to stick on the rear bumper of your classic ride, or expand your wardrobe with some car-themed apparel, I'm sure you're gonna love these designs. All designs are made by me and my own ideas, no AI trickery involved, for classic car owners that can handle a joke, and more designs get added along the way. By buying an artwork, you get to hang something nice on your wall, and I get to work on my retirement plans. So visit your local Eds Automotive Art Emporium by searching for edsautoreviews.dashery.com or click the link in the description and get your awesome automotive art today. Let's start with the Ford Motor Company. Of all the American car companies, Ford simply decided to either go big or go home. The bumpers they introduced on their cars were simply massive across all of their models. Now, on the largest cars the company offered, namely all the Lincoln models but also the full-size Mercurys and Fords, the bumpers somewhat complemented the formal and commanding designs these cars had. Take Lincoln for instance. This is the 1972 model with the usual slimmer bumpers, and this is the 1974 Lincoln. I think the bumpers, although big, blend nicely with the upright chrome turning lights on the front fenders, as well as the large waterfall grille. Ford then decided to make their less luxurious cars look more upscale, think of the LTD, by giving it a Lincoln-like design, solving the bumper aesthetics problem. And here's a great example of what I explained earlier. This is a 1972 LTD, and it has the deep recessed headlights to the loop-around bumper, but the 1973 LTD looks a lot more formal, with similar upright turn signals, center grille, and bigger bumpers. But when you move down the ladder to get to the mid-size and compact offerings, things go south real quick. What doesn't help is that some of these cars have an overall sporty design with Coke bottle styling and sweeping curves, like this Torino right here. It's a good-looking muscle car, right? Well, this was 1971. But by 1974, Starsky and Hutch had to make do with this. It's a pseudo-sporty, pseudo-luxury car. Heavy and bulky full-size car styling is dumped on an otherwise sleek and sporty body style, especially with the Elite Edition. And we'll look at the bumpers. There are park benches smaller than these bumpers. Especially from the side, you get the impression that these bumpers are not attached to anything. So if these bumpers already had a big impact on the styling of mid-size cars, what about the compact Pinto? Well, when the Pinto was released, it had small and thin European-like bumpers. This changed for the 1973 model year, when they were somewhat bigger but still very much the same. The body really started in the following year. Look at that, front and rear. It's like these bumpers have their own zip code. They also look like they're in no way attached to the body, and not only that, they are even wider than the car body, not only sticking out over the length of the car, but also the width. The Chrysler Corporation had just released their so-called fuselage bodies that gave the cars an overall smoothness, no sharp body lines or creases, which also affected the front and rear end styling. Most fuselage Mopars had loop-around bumpers. So, what did Chrysler do? Here is where it gets interesting. There was still some room for interpretation when it came to the bumper requirements for the 1973 model year. On models like the sleek-looking Dodge Monaco and the sinister-looking Imperial, Chrysler simply decided to install small rubber bumper guards, or bumperettes as they're sometimes referred to meet the requirements. It was an easy way to avoid changing too much of the design of these cars. But alas, the following year, 1974, Chrysler also had to switch to installing city block-sized bumpers on their cars. Although bulky, I don't find them as big and massive as the Ford bumpers. Here you can also see Chrysler completely dropped the fuselage styling in favor of a more generic front-end design approach, finding somewhat of a middle ground between General Motors and Ford. But even then, the bumpers are neatly tucked under or in the body. Also, Chrysler's mid-size cars like the Dodge Dart and the Plymouth Valiant really didn't look all that bad with the new bumpers. They looked quite attractive, in fact. It wasn't until the second half of the 70s some Chrysler models featured bumpers that were rather, present. Next up is AMC. Now, the other car companies were usually swimming in cash, and although it was no fun to adopt the new bumper rules, it also didn't make them go bankrupt. AMC, on the other hand, was always short on cash, so new bumper rules and regulations meant new headaches. What did AMC do? AMC decided to see what solution fit best to what model for the 1973 model year. This meant that much of their compact and mid-size cars like the Pacer, Gremlin and Hornet would receive full-size energy-absorbing bumpers, similar in size and styling like Ford. But the sporty Javelin was given the Chrysler treatment by installing rubber bumper guards. Now this was fine and dandy for 1973, but for 1974 the rules were even stricter. And yet, the Javelin still featured the same bumper. How does that work? Well, the Javelin was part of an exemption. All cars had to comply, except cars with a wheelbase of less than 115 inches or 290 centimeters that had 2 doors and a hardtop roof. Oddly specific. Not that it mattered, as AMC calculated it would cost too much to make the car comply for the 1975 standards, and decided to discontinue the model after 1974 anyway. So it mostly worked out for AMC. After all, no one is going to pay attention to these bumpers when the rest of the front end looks already bone ugly. If you'd ask me what my favorite thing is about the design of the Matador, I'd most likely say the bumpers. But it's his sleek-looking cousin, the Matador Coupe, that's the real victim here. With its angled and pointy front end and rear end design, these blocky bumpers just kill the looks it was going for. Interesting to note is that AMC didn't use any panel fillers, so the bumpers on these cars were actually freestanding. And so we arrive at General Motors, and I think I saved the best for last, for now. See, whereas the others simply decided to give in and accept the fate that half of your front end is taken up by chrome real estate that protects the rest of the car, GM actually tried to find clever ways to literally save face of the cars. First off, yes, some GM cars couldn't escape the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers in their full glory. But even then, GM designed them with some shape and contours in them so they appear a bit more slimmed down as compared to the full-fat bumpers of Ford. But GM had more tricks up their sleeve. Eventually, they tried to hide the bumpers as best they could in some of their models. They usually did this by covering up the gap between the metal body and the bumpers with filler panels. These panels were not made of metal but plastic, so that it could fold and flex with the bumper on impact. You don't know what I'm talking about? Take a look at this 1975 Cadillac Eldorado, for instance. See the body panel between the bumper and the rest of the body? Yes, those are plastic filler panels. For 1974, GM presented their ideas of covering up the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers by having a unique approach for every division. Buick, for instance, had bumpers that would fold into the body on impact and were shoved under the grille. Oldsmobile took it one step further. The bumper and the split grille were a separate entity hanging from the hood. This means that on impact, the bumper and the grille would be pushed back into the body. Cadillac had a similar approach. The entire grille and bumper were one big movable piece. And here's a little fun fact. These were the years overall quality and fit and finishing declined on these cars due to cost savings. For the longest time, I thought that the build quality and engineering on these cars was so bad that these cars came with huge panel gaps from the factory, like the gap between the grille and the hood of this Cadillac. But nothing could be further from the truth, as it was deliberately designed this way to give room for the entire grille and bumper to move. Now you know. Chevrolet and Pontiac took the concept to even greater levels. As mentioned before, Pontiac already played around with front ends made entirely out of plastic. These so-called Endura bumpers led to ultimate freedom in front end design and the elimination of chrome bumpers, giving the cars extra sportiness with color-matching bumpers. Pontiac carried on with these Endura bumpers to cover up the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers underneath that styling, like the Pontiac Grand Am. Its pointy nose is entirely made out of flexible plastic. But you can also see it in the mid-70s Firebirds. Look closely and you'll see that the body folds over the front bumper. Through clever design, the car features a rather pointy and angled front end, but that's just the body trying to meet the extended bumpers. The overall look is that you don't see the bumpers as separate units just dumped on the front end, and thus preserving the sporty looks, while also looking aerodynamic. And finally, there was Chevrolet, experimenting with front ends where everything was made of soft and flexible plastic, so that there would be no damage to the front end whatsoever, completely eliminating any repair cost after a crash. This idea was then transferred to the new Malibu Laguna Type S3. GM decided to make the entire front end one big piece of flexible body part that also acted as the bumper, meeting the standards in a very subtle way. So, were these American bumper standards only for American car makers? Nope. Every car maker that was in one way or another active in the USA had to comply. This also included European and Japanese car makers. They also suddenly had to deal with these new rules. This immediately caused problems for French Citroën. See, along with the requirements for absorbing the impact, the bumpers were also required to be mounted on a certain height. No biggie, right? Well, not if you make cars with adjustable ride height, like Citroën with the new SM. They asked the US government what they should do, and the government replied, I don't know, you're the car maker, go figure it out. And Citroën figured it out, they simply abandoned the US market. Just like that. The bumper standards made Citroën quit. Not that it mattered all that much, as I'm surprised if they had a good year if they sold more than 3 cars in the US. Volvo, which already made safety one of their main selling points at the time, decided to change their cars according to the American bumper standards and sell the cars with these American bumpers elsewhere in the world, further reinforcing the idea that Volvos are rolling bricks with battering rams. The German luxury cars were just gaining ground in the US, but they also had to comply. And a great example is the Mercedes-Benz SL Roadster. The bumpers, along with the US's retarded headlight rules, changed the car from looking like this to looking like this. Some of these US spec cars eventually found their way back into Europe as classic cars, so it's always fun to spot them and tell your friends that they've been imported from the US. They'll then ask you, how can you tell? Well, look at the bumpers and the headlamps. But the real automotive massacre took place in the world of exotic and foreign sports cars. Not that it mattered to Americans, their one and only sports car, the Corvette, was cleverly designed around the 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, much the same as the Pontiac Firebirds I talked about earlier. But foreign cars had to comply, and most of the time their original cool looks were completely destroyed by these bumpers. MG had to convert its MGB Roadster from having a chrome grille to a rubber split grille. Porsche had to convert their 911 model by adding new rubber attachments. Jaguar fitted their graceful E-Type with rubber blocks on the front and rear. And arguably the worst of them all, the Maserati Kamshin. This car has what I think is one of the coolest rear-end designs ever, with the floating taillights. That's right, part of the rear end is made from glass and the taillights were placed in that. But not according to the US government. Besides starting up the discussion about the bumpers, the taillights also had to go. And the end result? A sad shadow of its former self. My God! But allow me to give you one final example that's an absolute pinnacle of this big bumper business. Can I get a drum roll? The city car. Right. The story behind this fella is an interesting one not worth mentioning right now, but this city car was an effort to develop a small, all-electric, low-cost transportation during a time of high fuel prices. The city car was deemed an actual car by the law, and thus it needed the new 5-mile-per-hour bumpers. And will you look at it? If you said it was a bumper car, I would believe you. I mean, look at it. I don't know what is longer, the total length of the bumpers or the car. I mean, look at it. It's designed to be a 2-seater, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a full-on 6-seater with extra space for 2 on the front and 2 on the rear. Sorry, I can't take this seriously. By the mid-70s, every car in the US market was a rolling reinforced fortress. You remember those cartoons where they make jokes about street parking? Well, you can do it now, as Ford demonstrates in this commercial. The US government wasn't done yet. New plans were made to further raise the limits on these bumpers for the 1980 model year. In the meantime, the car industry and associated organizations lobbied against these even more stringent rules, saying that it led to more design complexity, higher manufacturing and thus retail costs, higher repair costs, and also openly questioned what the exact benefits were. Did these bumpers really improve overall safety? After 2 years the new rules were active, in 1982 it was decided by the US government to roll back the rules to the previous standards. The car industry was content, consumers and insurance organizations not so much. Still, the typical prominent bumpers would remain as a standard design feature on many American cars in the years to come. Some American cars embraced their looks and it became part of their classical and conservative design, but by the mid-80s there was a renewed interest in aerodynamic design. More and more cars started to adopt the styling where the front end was angled towards the outer end of the extended bumpers, much like Pontiac did in the mid-70s. But much through the 80s and the 90s, most American cars still had those distinct prominent bumpers as opposed to European and Asian cars. It wasn't until the late 90s when most American cars started to lose their protruding front ends, mostly because of the new developments in bumper technology and also the awareness that bumpers are not the only solution to crash protection. As much as you try to hold back the impact and forces, it also helps to let the rest of the car absorb the impact through crumple zones. And that puts an end of an era of blunt battering rams gracing many American cars. By the early 2000s, almost all American cars had lost their chrome-laden structures that were placed before the grille. So, if you want to find these vehicles with rubber bumpers and bump around, well, you know where to go. If you want to know more about the Malaise era, click the video in the top left. If you want to know even more about the Malaise era, click the video in the bottom left.